Hi, everyone. We are so excited to be here to talk about such an important subject. The energy industry is President Trump's arguably #1 most important policy of his new administration. Secretary, it's great to have you today.
Oh, glad to be here. Thrilled to be in the presence of Ronald Reagan's legacy and to be working for President Trump. I'm pinching myself right now.
So let's talk about big picture to kick us off. Tell us about big picture energy, the industry today, and how you want to change policy. What is U.S. policy to look like versus, for example, European energy policy?
Yeah, that would be the two polar opposites. In 2010, right after the financial crisis, the economy of the EU and the United States were roughly similar size. Both of them were about 25% of global consumption. Coming out of that financial crisis, Europe went all in on we're gonna get away from hydrocarbons, all justified in the name of climate change, but the impact there was immeasurably small. But they went a different direction on energy. We're gonna get rid of this old stuff, we're gonna constrict it, we're gonna spend money on something else, and we're gonna change our economy. The U.S. didn't do that. We've had a couple presidents trying to, but we went a different direction. Here, you fast forward, 12, 13 years ahead, we were both 25% of global consumption. Today, Europe's 18%. The United States is 28%. Just an amazing divergence. In dollar terms, the U.S. economy has grown over 80% since then. Europe's grown about 10% in dollar terms. When you mess up energy, you mess up your economy, you mess up your quality of life, you mess up you're not just your economic security, but your national security. And they've proven that in spades.
Amazing. And yes, because the energy industry is not just an economic industry, but it is an economic issue as well as a national security issue. So how do you want to change policy? What are you doing? You've said many times you want all hands on deck. Energy expansion in many areas. Walk us through it.
Yes, I mean, again, I give a couple contrasts. In the 4 years of the Biden administration, the amount of electricity we produced at the end of the administration versus the beginning was less than a 2% change. Almost no growth in the electricity production, yet the price went up 25%. That changes the quality of life for Americans. It changes the ability to conduct business in the United States. We've got AI exploding on the scene. Are we gonna win the AI revolution with increasingly expensive but not increasing in quantity electricity? Absolutely not. And so President Trump recognizes that if you have a low-cost energy advantage over other nations, not only do you increase the quality of living of your people, because they just simply energy impacts the price of everything, not just your heating bill and filling up your gas tank, but it affects the price of food and every product you buy, the size house you can build. So all of these, Trump recognized that not only would this change the quality of people's lives, but you could bring industry and business back to this country. We have chased away, and Europe has done it even worse. Almost all energy-intensive manufacturing has left wealthy countries, mostly because of bad energy policies, and just gone to lower-income countries. It doesn't stop the production of those goods. It just means instead of being produced in a factory in the United States, they're produced in a factory in China, of course a more polluting factory, and then loaded on a diesel-powered ship and brought back to the United States. That's not green. That's just exporting emissions, exporting jobs, and sort of hollowing out the job opportunities for rural people and blue-collar people.
But Secretary, when you talk about the growth story, it starts with oil and gas, but then it balloons to so many other things. And there's nuclear, which I want to get into today. But first, take us a little behind your background. We just saw and heard about your founding Liberty Energy, but when you first hit on shale and the shale business, you didn't realize that it was going to become a revolution. How did it happen? Tell us how you discovered shale.
Wow, well, in short, blind squirrel finds nut. I grew up in an age of a mania just like today, and the world was going to come to an end, in 10 or maybe 20 years, but not more than that, and hydrocarbons were the devil then. The problem was we were running out of them, and industrial civilization was going to collapse. This sort of depletionist mentality. This is in the 80s. Of course, it started in the 60s and 70s, but I was impacted by that. I was kind of a nerdy science math kid, and that's why I went to MIT specifically to work on fusion energy. I didn't want to be part of a world that was going downhill because they were running out of energy. Graduate school, I worked on solar energy. If I hadn't met this gal in the front row when I was 18, I may not have gotten into the oil and gas business. But as a grad student at UC Berkeley, I had to get a job to help pay my bills at a tiny Silicon Valley company. But their customer base was oil and gas industry. So I got exposed to that. And then I kind of developed technologies that could play some role in this industry. And then maybe 10 years later, in the late 90s, based on some geothermal work I was doing in Japan and these sort of very nerdy, complex hydraulic fracture models I was developing, I had an idea about how fractures might behave differently than people think they do. Then I met another, even nerdier guy who had a different idea. And then as we talked, we're like, man, what if we tried to do this, my refrac idea, and use his frac design idea? And we met this company called Mitchell Energy. I'd never heard of them. And they said, we'll try it 3 times. And the first 2 times, it didn't actually execute. One more strike, it would have been dead. But the third one worked. It went in the ground and led to commercial shale gas production. Mitchell had been trying for 15 years to figure out how to get commercial quantities of gas out. So it was exciting. And I thought, boy, this one field and these guys like us, and there's some more work here. But certainly no conception where that would snowball to. And
then you wrote the paper in 1998, The Frac That Changed Everything.
We got to have a modest title. But Maria, the one correction I have to make is we didn't write that in 1998. It was about the frac that happened in 1998, but we couldn't actually write that paper until like 2004 because it was somewhat confidential, the techniques we were doing. And of course, we didn't know. We wouldn't have had a braggadocious title like that in 1998. But by 2004, it was clear like this is going to be something.
All right. So you studied nuclear in college. You studied and worked on solar after that. Tell us how all of this fits into your plans in terms of turning all of this into policy now that you can do so.
Yeah, my view on energy has always been I don't care what the source of energy is. What matters is what it brings to human lives. You need affordable, reliable, secure energy. It just transforms the quality of people's lives. Human life expectancy was about 30 years, as best as we can tell, before the invention of agriculture, which was an energy revolution for the energy source that powers the human machine, food. But human life expectancy at birth was about 30 years, 200 years ago, 150 years ago. Today it's over 70 years. That transformation goes hand in hand with this explosion in available energy that came from hydrocarbons. First from coal and peat, and then oil, and then natural gas, and all these other hydropower, nuclear, wind, solar. I call them, they're all derivative sources of oil, gas, and coal. Because you can't make any of those without oil, gas, and coal to make those machines that harvest energy differently. But the advantages of hydrocarbons, despite my efforts on all these other technologies, are just so awesome that it has turned out we've added new energy sources on top, but we haven't at all shrunk the role of hydrocarbons in the energy system. 85% of primary energy in 1973, 85% of primary energy in 2023. So to say we're going to take that away and only do this is just a road to human impoverishment and ultimately human death. But can we add other sources on that can add on to what we have and maybe someday be the big sources of energy? Absolutely. You got to be open to innovation, and it's got to be driven by facts and math and trade-offs, and not our politics or my friends like this or I like that. Take the politics, take the emotion out of energy. It's about math. It's about trade-offs.
Well, speaking of that, before you can actually dig into what you want to do in terms of expansion, you've had to wind back some of the policies that were in place under the last administration. Tell us what happened after the election and before the inauguration.
Oh yeah. accelerated energy subtraction. So there's a loan office in the Department of Energy. They're maybe for a reasonable idea. If there's promising businesses, but they're not commercial yet, maybe they need a little extra capital to give them a nudge to get things going forward. Here's a tool. So that office has been around for about 15 years, and it lent a little more than $40 billion. That's a lot of money in those 15 years. Some famous failures, some good successes. But then an election happened in November of last year. President Trump got elected. After Election Day and before Inauguration Day, the Loan Program Office put out $90 billion in loans and loan commitments, well more than double what it did in 15 years beforehand in a very unique 76 days.
That's unbelievable. So you think that the money was there, they wanted to get the money out the door, just make these commitments before you all came in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, very little of this money will do anything to enrich the lives of Americans and grow our supply of abundant, affordable, secure energy. So yeah, a little disheartening about how our government can work.
One of the areas of energy that I hear a lot about is nuclear energy. And I want you to talk a little about that because many people believe that this is an area that has been very underinvested. Are you going to change that? And what is the opportunity around nuclear?
Yeah, so nuclear is this incredible force. Like hydrocarbons are chemical energies. You're rearranging electrons in atoms by changing their molecular structure, and you liberate a lot of energy. You know, nuclear energy, you're not rearranging the electrons, you're rearranging the nucleus of the atoms. And there's just much more energy density there. And in an incredible testament to American ingenuity and American drive and American optimism, in less than 2.5 years during World War II, at the Manhattan Project, scientists figured out the rest of the physics of a nucleus, did the engineering and science, and built a nuclear weapon and deployed it in less than 2.5 years. You know, you can't get an environmental impact statement to put a path through your park in 2.5 years today, which is another structural problem in our country. You saw how much amazing energy could be liberated from a small amount of materials. So soon after that, we developed a nuclear power industry, of course, led by the United States. And in a few decades, really in less than 3 decades, we got most under construction and most of them completed. We built over 100 nuclear power plants that supplied 20% of U.S. electricity, not total energy, but electricity, pretty quickly. But then a few years before that, the government did what the government does, and we created a new agency called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, and since its creation, we've built 3 nuclear power plants. So we killed an industry, and it's been killed for decades. So that supply chain, that kids thinking like me that nuclear is sexy and they want to go into that industry, that is all shrunk. But this is still fundamentally an enormous energy source that's so fit to American technology and capital and entrepreneurialism, but it's been dead for 3 decades. So it's going to take some nudges, and the President Trump is all in on this. We're going to try to reduce the regulatory burden. We're going to use some financial incentives. We're going to take some enriched uranium material we have in the Department of Energy and deploy it to private companies that want to get new reactors going. We're going to use land at the Department of Energy facilities for test beds, and we're going to do everything we can to kickstart nuclear energy going forward.
And President Trump just recently wrote executive orders.
4 bold executive orders that will lead to the launch of this nuclear renaissance during his presidency. To see the full implications of this will be several years out, in fact, decades out, but it will likely be a very, very big deal.
Now, I want to talk a bit about the regulatory backdrop, because here in your industry is one of the areas that we're going to see major impact from deregulation, and it has to do largely with permitting. I know that in the last administration, there were a lot of pauses in place, pauses of LNG export plants, as well as withholding land leases. What happened? How can you change it? How soon can we expect permitting reform?
Well, permitting reform has got to go through Congress. And to really get that, there's a little bit in the big, beautiful bill, and I don't want to downplay that, but we need a broader coalition to do major permitting reform. It's just, as I said, it's just simply hard to build anything in America today. You know, we got to be a fantastic nation by bold people building things. We still have people doing bold things, but nobody's building big things unless you live on the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. They still build big things there. Very hard to do it elsewhere. So I think that will be a longer term, but let me give you a few very big things that we were able to do. The day President Trump was inaugurated, the day he was inaugurated, we ended the so-called pause on the permitting for new LNG export terminals. These are tens of billions of dollars, giant facilities. Again, almost all on the Texas and Louisiana Gulf Coast. But natural gas over the last 15 years, by far the fastest growing energy source on the planet. We went from 500 exajoules to 600 exajoules global energy consumption over that 15 years. 40% of it came from natural gas. Second fastest growing energy source, oil. You probably can guess the third, coal. That's growth, not size, growth over the last 15 years. But natural gas is the fastest, and it also is the energy source the U.S. is the most dominant in. We produce about as much natural gas as the next three biggest producers combined. And it is also the second largest export of our country. And we have approved, in the 120 days I've been in this seat, we have approved more capacity for exporting of natural gas than the number 2 exporting country in the world, which is Qatar, and the number 3 exporting country in the world, Australia, just in 120 days. Now, it will take years to build that. But the U.S. will go from not just the largest exporter of natural gas, but just simply the dominant exporter of natural gas. Yeah. Whether in Europe or Asia or South America or Africa, this is, again, the fastest growth in demand for this energy source, natural gas, and the U.S. is a leader. Like, this is a win for our country. This is a win for our balance of trade. This is a win for our allies around the world. Because who was the largest exporter of natural gas for decades before the shale revolution? Russia.
Amazing. And that takes you back to what you were saying about Europe. I mean, these are national security issues. You mentioned, is it largely the Gulf of America that is the biggest opportunity? And then I know you're traveling to Alaska coming up. Tell us where the biggest opportunities are right now for that capacity in America.
Yeah, so the export terminals today are almost entirely on the Gulf of America, on the Texas and Louisiana coasts, and they're there because you can build things there. The natural gas comes from Pennsylvania or Ohio or North Dakota or Texas or Oklahoma. The gas comes from all over, but that's where you can build these giant facilities to export it. Now think of when you leave out the Gulf of America, there's not a short route to Japan, or to Korea or to Taiwan, right? You've got to either go through the Panama Canal and these bigger and bigger ships. That's not always a good bet. So, it goes around Cape of Good Hope and goes to Asia. Now, when it gets there, it's still way cheaper than oil. The demand is still immense. But the idea of Alaska is Alaska, a state that has had more sanctions, more restrictions on production of oil and gas in Alaska than everything we did to Iran and Venezuela and North Korea, if they produced any, combined. Wow. The last administration just strangled Alaska, this awesome state of immense natural resources. And up where all the oil and gas production is native people living in a very harsh climate. They got over 10 years of increased life expectancy when we started developing oil and gas up there through jobs and money and healthcare and energy to stay warm in the winter and to preserve food. So in any case, Alaska's been this great resource. It boomed, and then it's been strangled. The idea is we export oil from the North Slope of Alaska, comes by pipeline to southern Alaska and then exported. We want to build a pipeline from the North Slope of Alaska that brings natural gas, not just oil, and then a natural gas export terminal on the southern coast of Alaska that in 6 days can sail to Tokyo or Taiwan or Korea, and then down to our allies in East Asia. So they're getting energy from us, but it would be awesome and great from a geopolitical stance to have a very short supply chain between a huge industrial American facility and our allies in East Asia.
And to make the point of national security issues, and you mentioned Taiwan, this is where 90% of the advanced semiconductor chips are made in Taiwan. They're in desperate need of energy. Tell us the story around Taiwan and the opportunity for America there.
Yeah, Taiwan, I think, is fitting in a place of Ronald Reagan. Economic liberty, optimism, and ingenuity, have really ruled the day in Taiwan. They don't have a lot of natural resources, right? They got some geopolitical challenges. They're a small island, but they've generated tremendous wealth and an incredible specialization in making chips, in making semiconductor fabrication. This is technology, this is an industry at scale, and have just created a tremendous lead. But like every industry where you're actually building a product, it's energy intensive. So Taiwan gets originally most of their electricity, like everyone in the world does, and still the largest source of electricity in the world is coal, and it will be for decades to come. So if you want gold to be gone and coal to be gone in 10 years, that's not happening. But Taiwan got most of their electricity from coal. And then as natural gas came in and grew, now its largest source of electricity is natural gas. It also had nuclear power. I think it turned away from nuclear power. I'm hoping it pivots back and adds nuclear power. But its biggest source of electricity right now is natural gas. That comes in on ships, from around the world, but I think dominantly from the United States. And energy security is key for Taiwan. It is very dependent on imported energy, and it's got a tight relationship with the United States. But I think having a nearby short sea delivery supply chain from Alaska to Taiwan for natural gas, huge win for Alaska and the United States, even bigger win for Taiwan.
Especially as China is ramping up its production of batteries and wants to reunify with Taiwan.
Yeah, the natural gas that comes to Taiwan today, comes through the Straits of Malacca, right by China on its way to Taiwan. Where if you come from Alaska, this is a much more secure waterway controlled by us. I think that's extra geopolitical security in that.
A word on coal, since you said it is number 3 in terms of importance. You last week made a change to keep a coal plant open in Michigan. Tell us what was behind what you just did last week.
Yes, okay. A little backstory, of course. So I told the story of Europe. They turned this different direction in their energy, and one of their top goals was they're going to get rid of coal. Now, they failed. Coal's still a major source of electricity in Europe, but they shrunk it a lot. But they replaced it with sources that are more expensive and are less reliable. Germany, for example, spent $500 billion. And what did they get at the end of that? They tripled the price of electricity. They moved most of their energy-intensive manufacturing out of Germany, but their total energy system, not just electricity, their total energy consumption went from 80% hydrocarbons to 74%. That's a lot of money to spend, a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of exporting industry to go from 80 to 74. That's not an energy direction we should go. The last administration, truly unfathomable to me, really wanted to follow the European energy direction. We're going to shut our coal plants, as many as we can. We're going to put up a lot of wind turbines and solar panels, and everything will be good. And of course, everything wasn't good. We didn't grow our electricity production. We grew our prices up. And we have in the United States now, particularly in the Midwest, a less stable electricity grid. So in any case, what happened was, 3 years ago, middle of the Biden administration, they made a deal to close a very large coal plant in southwestern Michigan, the Campbell plant, 1.5 gigawatt plant. They agreed as part of the we're going to get off coal plan to close that plant 15 years before its slated end date of the plant. Well, why? Because it was fashionable, maybe. They're going to close this coal plant. And we got very close to that coal plant being closed, and we just looked at the math and said, we don't want the lights going out on Americans. Not only do we not want the lights going out, our air conditioners not working in the summertime, we want to bring data centers into the United States. We want to reshore our manufacturing. We don't want to have tight margins today. We want to have excess supply today so we can bring more industry back. And so we had to use executive authority to stop the closure of that coal plant. There was, of course, some bad things said about me and President Trump, surviving old dirty coal or whatever. 2 days after I signed that order last Friday, there was a blackout in MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator down in Louisiana, but on the same subgrid, they had a blackout short of energy late in the springtime. So that's why we don't want to just go around closing firm, reliable power plants, because it's fashionable.
Yeah, so to that end, assess for us the electrical grid, assess for us the demand that you're seeing in America today as we talk about the growth of AI, quantum computing, and this next level of technology and the energy that it will require.
Okay, yes. So another quick backstory on this data. So the United States, we've been the industrial powerhouse of the world, I would say, for about a century. You look at current data, we consume, don't worry about the units, but we consume 25 exajoules a year to manufacture products. China consumes 70, 3 times as much energy to manufacture things, which is why so much of the stuff we consume gets shipped over from China. And some of it's very important, like precursors for drugs and medical systems and all this stuff. So we want to bring that back to our country, which means just for security of our existing industries, we need to grow our electricity and total energy production in the United States. And we have AI arriving today. What is AI? It is just the latest energy-intensive manufacturing industry. And it has to take the highest reformed and most expensive form of energy, which is electricity, but it turns it into something very valuable, intelligence. So if we're going to win and lead in the AI race, we not only have to supply all our current needs, we want to bring that other manufacturing back, we have to win in AI. So we need 50, 100 gigawatts of additional capacity, in the next, 2 or 3 years. And we almost shut down 1.5 gigawatt of perfectly fine working capacity today. So we can't do that. We need to make it easier, again, to build big things in the United States, like power plants, simplify the bureaucracy, because today you can build a power plant, then you got to wait years to get the interconnection that you can get onto the grid, and because there's 77 other things in front of you that are never going to get built, but they're going to have to run studies on them and then decide they're not going to get built. So we need to make the system more efficient so that people will deploy capital. I had a dinner in the Bay Area 2 nights ago with leaders from all of the big hyperscalers. These are people putting hundreds of billions of dollars out in the next few years to build data centers, and that is by far their biggest concern. We're willing to put the money up. We're willing to put the capital up. We got to be able to build things. And they checked off their problems. And I'm like, I know, I hear you. We fixed that one. No, we haven't fixed that one yet, and hadn't even heard about that one. But all I could say to them is I can assure you that President Trump and everyone in the cabinet, we will fix these problems. Some of them are easy, some of them are difficult, but we must fix these problems.
All in the midst of a revolution in the marriage of healthcare and technology. I want to talk about this supercomputer that you're working on. You took a visit to the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and you announced a new contract with NVIDIA and Dell Technologies. Tell us about it.
We're going to build a phenomenal supercomputer, and a supercomputer not like for data center calculations that you might do there, but tailored. The architecture of the computer is tailored to do science. It's different kind of problems, different kind of computation, but it will likely be the most powerful scientific machine on Earth. And one of the things I'm super proud of is the team there decided to name the computer the Doudna, after Jennifer Doudna, who is just an incredible scientist. She won the Nobel Prize in 2020, so recent Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and she is the genius who figured out, she found a tiny protein locked inside a nasty bacteria that if you can isolate that protein and use it, you could take the human genome and snip it here and pull that bad thing out. You can, we haven't done it yet, insert this thing in. So it is an awesome power for good. It's also an awesome responsibility, what this can do. But this will lead to incredible, incredible advances in medical technology. So many diseases that plague us today, so many things that are killing us today, with this technology will be eminently treatable not like in a generation, in the next few years. I don't know if you saw the story. There was a kid, and I didn't even see directly the story. There was a kid born like 2 weeks ago, and he had some very bizarre, terrible genetic defect. He was going to have a short life expectancy. And using the technology developed by Jennifer Doudna, they edited his gene, and he looks all good. Like, that's crazy.
At a time that critics are saying China is catching up with the United States when it comes to medical research regarding things like cancer. And you say?
Yes. Incredible, yes.
Is China catching up?
China in basic science, certainly in medical science, and certainly in AI, is a ways behind us. There are areas China is actually ahead of us. But in medical science, no. China will cross lines we won't cross. So they are doing things we're not doing, but I think because we ethically don't want to do them. But China is, in everything technological or military, China's the rival that matters. China's the rival that matters. But I think in medicine and drug discovery, I think we have a fair lead on China today. I think our free and independent culture should keep that lead. But if we had too big of a hand of government, no, you can't do that because something bad might happen. You can stifle that. We started to go that with AI, diffusion rules at the end of the Biden administration. Something might go wrong. Things are going to happen bad with AI. But if you smother it because something might go wrong, you won't stop it everywhere. You'll just stop it here. You won't stop it in China or elsewhere. But Maria, I am most excited, maybe most excited about the advancements that are going to come to cancer treatments, to health improvements, health efficiency that's going to come from the computing, AI, and not long after quantum computing. When quantum computing meets AI, that's also within the next decade. Like, this will be the most excited decade of scientific discovery, I think, ever.
So many levels of impact, enabling the United States to become energy independent, but also enabling the United States to sell energy across the world, making other countries less dependent on the bad guys, like Russia, like Iran.
Hugely transformative. We used to, be worried about the Middle East. We sent soldiers to die. We did things because we were worried about our own energy security. We were, not long ago, the largest importer of oil in the world and the largest importer of natural gas in the world. Today, we're the largest exporter of natural gas and a net exporter of oil. And guess who's the biggest importer of oil in the world and the biggest importer of natural gas in the world? Both China. We have an incredible energy system advantage over China. But we should use it not just to the benefit of our country, but to bring security and tight alliances with our allies as well.
Secretary, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.